I do this following story because it needs to be done. I do this following story because I've had Miranda Devine on my show. She is from the New York Post, and she wrote the book, Laptop from Hell. We've had her on a few times. And I do the story because I'm sick of this country continuously looking outside of the shores, just directing the gaze of useful idiots outside to other countries in order to explain dysfunction that is typically here and homegrown here at home. I do this particular story because I covered the story when it first took place, and it is damning, not just for Hunter Biden, but also for Joe Biden, who is entirely implicated in a completely true story that was put out initially by the New York Post. More importantly, I do this story for accountability. Because the fact of the matter is, the lying liars that lied like life and limb were on the line are not going to get accountability in the spaces to which they basically lurch along in the darkness. Nobody, not one of them, is going to hold the other one accountable for getting it so monstrously wrong. They didn't get it wrong because they didn't have evidence. They didn't even get it wrong because they didn't necessarily entirely look into the story and that type of stuff. They got it wrong because they didn't want to get it right. Because getting it right would have potentially impacted the election. The election being of Joe Biden. They wanted Biden to win that race. They knew that the email thing from the standpoint of Hillary Clinton did not do her any favors. And they didn't want this information to change the public's perspective on the race. That's the reality of it. The gravity of it cannot be understated in regards to what they were doing. And in this case, they continuously lied. And by saying they, I mean media personalities that got on television day after day after day after day. When that New York Post story came out and saying, this isn't real, this is Russian disinformation, our intelligence services says it's Russian disinformation, and smugly would insist that it is a BS story in the way that I believe it was the Associated Press or Reuters, I forget which one, basically put it. It might have even been NPR. I think it was NPR. The Hunter Biden laptop story was legit. Those were his laptops. It was understood early on those were his laptops when he never said they were not. It was understood that those emails were likely to be legit when he would never disown them. And the fact that the emails are legit, that it is his laptop, and that those emails implicate Joe Biden in an activity that Joe Biden said he knew nothing about, it is damning. This video should go viral. And it should go viral for the exact same reason that is the most important: accountability. The fact that they're not going to get accountability in their own spaces, the only place they're going to get it is here, in spaces like this, where you could point and you could show they got it monstrously wrong. And if you're finding out that the people are giving you an opinion that is more suited to a toilet, then maybe the next time they're giving you an opinion, you will be less likely to jump on board the bandwagon and believe that nonsense. Whether it was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, whether it was Trump in Russia, whether it was, for that matter, even this story, meaning them hiding the Hunter Biden stuff. If you are over and over and over again getting it wrong, and yet you keep your job, something is wrong with that process. And if a porn star has impotence, that porn star is out of work. If I'm giving you a bad take over and over again, they're going to fire me from my job. If a computer programmer deletes a database, he is going to lose his job. Most people, when they're doing something, they get it wrong, over a course of period of time, they lose their job because people who are basically paying them and putting money in their pockets and credit cards, in their ass cheeks, in the way that we make our way in this particular economy, well, they're going to stop paying you when you're not able to do the job. The rub in this case, though, is they did their jobs. It's just their ethical, philosophical responsibility to give a contextual, honest, base view of reality to the degree that you honestly can. and with the evidence and truth that you possibly can. Well, that took a backseat to the other priority of ensuring Donald Trump will not get elected. And the way they were going to do that is protect Joe Biden. And in this very specific case, the way they protected Joe Biden was to basically lie and pretend that a story that was true, that was legit, that was damning, that pointed to corruption in the context of Biden Inc. would not get airplay and would at the very least be subverted up until the election was over with and Joe Biden was assuredly in office. It is an utterly disgusting thing. And I'm saying this as somebody who can't stand the ground that Trump walks on. By the same token, it is not their responsibility to do that. The fact of the matter is, if indeed that information was sufficient enough to change the outcome of an election, then by definition, it was valid enough for the public to see it. And you basically had these people make a choice for you. They made a choice for you. Yes, it was for them also, and more importantly, it was for them. But in their minds, we don't want the American public to get information that they may think is too important. And therein lies the subjectivity, right? What do you mean too important? It may be massively important to me. And it may be so massively important to me that I don't vote for that person. And whether or not that massive importance to me matches yours is utterly and entirely irrelevant. If they're seeing information that makes them question the candidate to which you want them to vote for, well, maybe the candidate shouldn't have done it. This is kind of like the Hillary Clinton email stuff. In Biden's particular case, yeah, it looks bad when you have a letter of Hunter Biden talking about his dad and talking about a meeting with somebody from Burisma, especially since Biden has gone on the record saying, despite me being the viceroy of Ukraine and my son working at this radically, emancipatorily corrupt company in Ukraine, never talked about it. Never talked about it in dinners, never talked about it on the phone, never talked about it when we hung out, never talked about it when he called me on a crack bench, never talked about it at all. Maybe I never even seen my son for 5 years. As integral as work is to the American public, it's so integrated that oftentimes you ask somebody, what do they do? Because on some level, what they do gives you some level of context, or at the very least a picture in your head of who the person is. We're supposed to believe that Biden is the viceroy of Ukraine. His son has zero experience in oil and has zero experience about Ukraine. And yet is there making $50,000 a month at least, while also going on crack benches here in the United States. They weren't hiring him because of his talent. They were hiring him because of his last name. They even had him on paperwork and whatnot. My point here is that Biden is lying through his teeth about knowing Hunter Biden was working at that company and was in Ukraine. And more importantly, based on the emails anyway, was even involved in meeting some of those representatives. I'm going to show you a video of the lying liars that lied over and over and over again, almost in this kind of weird, hypnotic, Goebbels-esque way of manufacturing a consent by repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again, as if you repeat it 1,000,000 times, on the 1,000,001th time, it becomes somehow real, like Pinocchio becoming a real boy. Not so much. It was a lie back then. It's a lie right now. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and of course, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. These shows are going to be regular. You guys will probably see me here at 3 in the morning. When real men can't sleep, real men get up and basically do the news. Might as well do something constructive. And I got to be honest, getting back on the perch feels great. Don't get me wrong, I love fault lines, and my co-host Farron is astonishingly good at her job. But at the same token, there's something about having this kind of autonomy of space where it's entirely self-directed and you go where you want. But in this very specific case, let's get into it. New York Times or New York Post comes out with stories talking about Hunter Biden's emails. Okay, great. New York Post gets pushback from those stories from all sorts of sectors saying this is true, this isn't real, and putting into question the story that they were publishing. Twitter goes so far as to put them in Twitter jail. And then you have a list of newspapers gutting the story, and you have media personalities, talking heads, faces on screen, yapping, saying, this is Russian disinformation. This is Russian disinformation. Actually, what they were calling Russian disinformation was basically US disinformation, that they were basically peddling in defense of one Joe Biden. If we can whitewash corruption from Biden, then we can still call Trump corrupt. They spent all of their time calling Trump corrupt when Biden Inc. has a history of corruption going all the way back to his days in Delaware. Without further ado, though, I want to show this embarrassing clip of these people continuously and entirely getting it wrong, smugly, arrogantly getting it wrong. And again, zero accountability for any of them. I can go down the list of the things they basically got wrong. In fact, if you remember correctly, during the Trump and Russia period, they would have a story out every day. I remember going to places and people would have the TV on and be like, man, I am so sick of them talking about Trump. That's all they talked about. One after the next, and just think about it. The entire context and the premise, the framing of the world that they were using to look at Trump when he was dealing with, let's say, Russia or Venezuela or any of these countries was warped and basically wrong, completely so. One story after the next was basically based on something that was a complete conspiracy theory, and they reported it for 4 years like it was basically news. Nonsense. And this, once again, nonsense. Better belonging in a toilet.
Biden's secret emails.
A really fishy story.
The Post claimed that the emails were found on a laptop computer that was brought to a repair shop in Delaware in the spring of 2019.
The FBI is now investigating whether those alleged Hunter Biden emails are actually connected to a larger foreign intelligence operation.
They may be related to a foreign intelligence operation.
Foreign intelligence operation.
Foreign intelligence.
Foreign intelligence.
Foreign intelligence operation.
For all we know, these emails are made up.
The information found on the laptop may be part of a Russian disinformation campaign.
Part of a Russian disinformation effort.
Described by many intelligence experts as having hallmarks.
All the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation.
Russian disinformation.
Disinformation campaign.
This is a classic example of the right-wing media machine.
Isn't it weird how when you look at it like that, it becomes this repetitive thing over and over? If we just repeat it over and over, just keep repeating it, just keep repeating it, just keep repeating it. At some point, if you repeat it enough, they will believe it's true. And then using words like may, might, could be, sources say, anonymous sources say, government says, this guy said, Bob said, and giving you this impression that just because they're reporting it, that it is somehow equivalent to being true. How many times do you have to get it wrong to be that much more skeptical of the nonsense that these people are talking about? And whether it's this, whether it's the flagrant, breathtaking way in which they are dropping context on that issue with Ukraine, trying to make it look as if somehow Americans have something invested in getting Ukraine into NATO. It is nonsense. We're hurting and cutting our own nose off for that nonsense over there. I guess my point is, mainstream media presents a narrative, and they repeat that narrative, and they repeat it over and over and over again. And oftentimes, people who are not necessarily entirely paying attention to mainstream or to news, just kind of hear in the background, you have this kind of subconscious acceptance of the stuff, this kind of passive acceptance. And in that passive acceptance, anytime it comes up, the person will just repeat the passive acceptance. They may even think that they've come to their own conclusions, not realizing that the boundaries of debate in and of itself are set up to give you a certain point of view. Useful idiots. It's not a situation where they're necessarily thinking, and on some level, you can almost forgive them that if you hear that repetitive disinformation, Russian disinformation, Russian disinformation, disinformation, Russian disinformation, you hear that 1,000 times over the course of a week, you may actually start thinking it yourself. If you woke up in an insane asylum, how long do you have to be there before you start thinking you're insane? One more thing before I close this. I want to show you this guy. Do you know that guy? That guy's name is Ken Delania. When I first watched this video, I was like, this guy is still employed? That is shocking. If a porn star had impotence, he'd be out of work. And yet, this guy is right here. Ken Delania is basically a CIA plant and got fired from the NYTImes for having his work vetted by the intelligence agencies. Now, just like Derek Chauvin, and I've made the point that Derek Chauvin wasn't an anomaly. Derek Chauvin was the norm. And it's there but go the grace of God that many officers basically watch what Chauvin did. If you notice, Chauvin wasn't freaked out. He was just sitting there with his hands. He was pretty placid. Just, why are these people freaking out? Just doing my job. The other officers weren't alarmed by what was taking place. It was normal. Yeah, they distanced themselves from him because of how ghastly it looked. And again, there but the grace of God go I. We're not like that. That's only him. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain that knows different. Well, in Ken Delania's position, where he basically gets fired, right here, don't take my word for it. Right here. Ex-Tribune reporter, LA Tribune, Ex-Tribune reporter said to have collaborative relationship with the CIA. Just because he was found out, do you honestly believe he's the only one? And if these collaborative relationships exist, which they do, it makes all the sense in the world. It's the most practical thing in the world. Yes, you can go out, you can try to get a scoop and everything else, but it's far easier for somebody to say, hey, here, take this. And you say, thank you, and you publish it. And they pat you on the back saying, hey, good scoop, good scoop. True or not, who cares? Doesn't matter. A CIA or intel officer gave it to you. Only thing that you have to say is, sources say. And you're covered from this notion of being honest, truthful, and, integrity and all the good stuff. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is whether it's politicians, whether it's media, whether it's intel, all of these guys have a relationship or, let's say, a vested interest in using media in order to shape political opinions, political currents, the things that they talk about in the political space, even pressure on various politicians, or even to go after and attack various politicians, using media as a medium of a weapon to do so. From the standpoint of the CIA, trying to get various stories introduced, trying to get certain information introduced, trying to shape, let's say, U.S. opinion in regards to global items, you would think that media is just going to be honest actors in presenting that stuff. The fact of the matter is these relationships exist. They exist behind the scenes, and they exist all throughout. This guy, yes, he got fired. Don't trick yourself into believing he's an anomaly. Last point. Do not allow the crickets, the silence that you're hearing around this to anesthetize you to the outrage you should be feeling about this. In the New York Times story that came out and basically legitimized the New York Post story, and keep in mind, New York Times was one of those offenders that was basically attacking the New York Post and calling it Russian disinformation also. But this part. People familiar with the investigations that prosecutors had examined emails between Mr. Biden, Mr. Archer, and others about Burisma and other foreign business activity. Those emails were obtained by the New York Times in a cache of files that appears to have come from a laptop abandoned from Mr. Biden in Delaware repair shop. The email and others in the cache were authenticated by people familiar with them and with it, the investigation. In some emails, Mr. Biden displayed a familiarity with Farah and a desire to avoid triggering it. Now, the part that I wanted to get to right here. In the same 2014 email, Hunter Biden indicated that Burisma officials need to know in no uncertain terms what will... where is it? Right here we are. In another set of emails examined by prosecutors, Hunter Biden and Mr. Archer discussed inviting foreign business associates, including Burisma executive, to a dinner in April 2015 at a Washington restaurant where Vice President Biden would stop by. It is not clear whether the Vice President did make an appearance, according to people familiar with the event. Now, the wild part about it, even in this particular story, the New York Times is not necessarily exposing the most damning bits of it, even though they're alluding to some of the most damning bits of it. You have just authenticated these stories. You could have authenticated those stories a day or two after they came out in the New York Post. But to do so would have basically made the point that Biden is corrupt as hell and he's lying about his associations with his son and the issues of Ukraine. You didn't do that. All right, fair enough. The 2015 thing that they've basically said, look, this is real. Then you're stuck with the fact that the other emails are probably also real. And from the standpoint of the dinner that they're talking about, that they're uncertain whether Biden went to or not, well, all right, let's just go to the email record from the place that basically came out with the story first and that you've just said was true. Two points. Pilarski said that the representative of the new authorities in power tend to quite aggressively approach NZ unofficially with the aim to obtain cash from him. NZ isn't identified in the email, but appears to be a reference to Burisma's founder, Mykola Sieroskatsky, whose first name is Ukrainian version of Nicholas. When alleged shakedowns fail, they proceed to concrete actions in the form of one or more pretrial proceedings. We urgently need your advice on how you can use your influence to convey a message or signal to stop what we consider to be politically motivated actions. Hunter Biden responded by saying that he was with Archer in Doha, Qatar, and asked for more information about the format, if any, accusations being made against Burisma. Quote, who is ultimately behind these attacks on the company? Who in the current interim government could put an end to such attacks? He added. Now, the point of this was because they were basically trying to get him to use his political clout. And of course, he has none, but his dad does, in order to assist their business objectives. When you go to the top, and we're talking about the dinner, specifically referenced in the New York Times piece, you get this part. Dear Hunter, and again, April 17th. Again, the dinner is supposed to be, April 15th? Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to DC and giving me the opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. It's really an honor and a pleasure. As we spoke yesterday evening, would great to meet today for a quick coffee. What do you think? I could come to your office somewhere around noon, so before on the way to the airport. This part. Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to DC and giving me an opportunity to meet your father and spend time together. Does Hunter Biden have a father other than Joe Biden that I am completely unaware of? And if he does not have a father other than Joe Biden, then this letter would seem to indicate that they did meet. Now, Biden basically said, or some other representatives, there's nothing in our official calendar to show that this meeting took place. Okay, what about your unofficial calendar? What about you just not writing in your calendar at all because you didn't necessarily want anything associating you to the fact that you're hanging out with your son with this corrupt energy company, and you're basically telling people that there is no association between you and you didn't even know what your kid was doing. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all.